Have you seen this movie? This is Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket was released just 12 years after the Vietnam War ended for Americans. Some argue that this movie is probably one of the best military and war films there is, but only because of its accuracy to the military experience. I mean, the first 40 minutes is just of boot camp, and it explains it and depicts it to a T. It also has incredible duality, picturing both the military perspective of the war and the human perspective of the war. Full Metal Jacket follows the story of a young Marine. His name is Joker in the movie. He joins the Corps and then is deployed to Vietnam as a military journalist. Joker's character development is really what we're looking at in Full Metal Jacket. It's really not about the war. It's about the person experiencing the war. I'm not arguing if this is a good movie or not. In my opinion, it is a very, very good movie. I'm arguing the historical significance it brings to film. I'm arguing the importance of the discomfort it makes people feel when they watch this movie. That's what makes it historically significant. So the question is, how does Stanley Kubrick capture all of this in this movie? Okay, let's talk the technical examples Stanley Kubrick uses to create this film. Okay, I have 3 really famous shots from this movie, and we're going to break down the cinematography of it. First up, we have high angle shots. This is used quite a bit throughout the film when any form of higher power comes into play. In this example, this is Gunnery Sergeant, this is their drill instructor, and he is just laying into someone, and he's the higher power, he's the authoritarian. The high angle shots just really reinforce the vulnerability of the soldiers. Second, we have close-ups. Now, close-ups are used throughout the entire film. They're raw and very uncomfortable. And with a movie that's dealing with war, it kind of makes sense to make these close-ups and these shots very raw and uncomfortable because that's what war is. It's very raw and very uncomfortable. And in other popular shots in this movie, the close-ups are perfectly symmetrical. It really kind of reinforces the military's expectation for all of these soldiers to be the exact same. They're symmetrical. They have no really personality behind the uniform. Okay, and then we have moving backgrounds. This is one of the more famous shots from the movie. This is when Joker is being interviewed while he's deployed in Vietnam and actually experiencing the war. And we have a lot of moving stuff in the background. People, places, you can see the buildings half torn down. It's just a mess. These are one of the more strategic shots that Kubrick uses because it really just kind of reminds the viewer that there is ever-changing, fast-paced parts about a war. Like, there's always something going on. And even with a modern war as this one, things are always changing, always happening in the background. Okay, now we have dialogue and character development. These are 2 pretty important storytelling techniques that Kubrick uses to enhance this movie experience. So over here in dialogue, we have the language of the soldier and language of the desensitized soldier. Throughout the movie, Kubrick uses a lot of dark humor and satire to kind of keep the movie going along, and a lot of the time it's really, really dark humor. I mean, the soldiers and the Marines who are in the thick of it at this point, they are completely desensitized. Like, they're making jokes over someone dying right there in front of them. I mean, it's just weird. So throughout the whole movie, you have the language of the desensitized soldier, and then you have the language of what really they're supposed to be. It kind of gives them their purpose. Like, we have a lot of back and forth between how controversial this war was, and this is kind of what they were supposed to think and feel when they were deployed. So this dialogue has a lot of slurs, and the language of the soldiers and the Marines back and forth, lots of degrading and really racist comments, and it also involves slurs. And then we have the big character development. Again, we're talking about Joker here. Joker is the main character, and he suffers the most from this character development in one of the most demoralizing ways. His character is kind of supposed to be like the funny guy, but really it just kind of gets more and more depressing to watch. You find that the guy who's really supposed to be happy and fun, being the Joker, he's not that way towards the end of the movie. his morality is stripped away. All of his intrinsic values and what really matters to him most kind of gets stripped away and becomes more and more raw throughout the film. And then his past, his present, and his future are all different people as he's going through this. Again, it's very uncomfortable to watch. All of these choices really reinforce the oppression, the vulnerability, and the emotional state of both the individuals and the state of the country at this time, while also commentating on the human condition inherently while a seemingly normal human encounters the moral degradation of war and the cost of obedience.
I wanted to meet interesting and stimulating people of an ancient culture and kill them. I wanted to be the first kid on my block to get a confirmed kill.
So far we've been talking about Stanley Kubrick and how he frames the historical significance through his storytelling techniques. But really, to understand the Vietnam War and what he's really talking about and the actual historical significance behind it, we kind of need to take a step back and look at some things from the Vietnam War. More importantly, what the war meant to the American people and how people saw it. This up here is an excerpt from the book called Morality and the Movies by Dan Shaw, and he talks about Joker and how he embodies the union duality of the human spirit. We'll put a pin in that. But he also talks about the peculiar forms of the insanity inherent to the Vietnamese conflict, just like what we've been talking about, how Joker is very, very strangely affected by this conflict. Joker even verbatim talks about the union duality.
I think I was trying to suggest something about the duality of man, sir. The what? The duality of man, the Jungian thing, sir.
So the psychology that Joker's talking about here really is the reason why the Vietnam War was so controversial. The soldiers were told that they were the good guys, like the propaganda and the domino theory. Working class Americans were drafted to a war that they had no really thought in winning, but they were told that they were. Over here we have The Limits of Persuasion by Carolyn Page, and she talks about the domino theory. And this was a lot of what people were being told, that it says the concept of Southeast Asian nations being a row of dominoes that would automatically fall if South Vietnam was lost to communism, a rigid mechanistic theory that took little account of each nation's individual circumstances, therefore easily attacked on these grounds by critics. But this is what soldiers were being told. They were the good guys, they were in it for the good fight, and it was not what was really happening.
They think it's a big joke.
So a lot of what Dan Shaw and Caroline Page were saying, and all other scholarly experts from the Vietnam War, has a lot to do with a lot of this. This is propaganda from the Vietnam War. And a lot of people like to think that propaganda is straight up lies. Well, it is, but it's not at the same time. It's very important to understand that propaganda is more a manipulation of thought and basically controlling how people think based on what they see, how they feel, and what they hear. For example, this woman had a lot to do with what people heard, and it really struck a nerve between the American people and the American soldiers who were in the good fight and suddenly had no trust in their government whatsoever. There was posters like this one from the American Red Cross to help endorse the war. Things like the bottom right to "In peace we serve" to prevent war, even though we all know that the war was actually going on right then and there. And the classic "Enlist now." Also, the incentives to both get people into the military to help, but also how much they lied about it. And there was going to be a draft anyway. So a lot of this propaganda has a lot to do with really the Stanley Kubrick film and what was really going on at the time. So behind those academic perspectives and why we were fighting in the war, what people were thinking about it and how it affected people, we can look at smaller aspects throughout the movie and what was really factual and what was fiction. Most of this stuff is pretty small. You would have to really do some deep diving into really seeing these things. These are kind of like blink and miss it things. For example, up in the top left corner, that helicopter that's a screenshot from one of the scenes. That is a British helicopter. It definitely would not have been in Vietnam, especially flown by an American Marine. Other things like Joker's glasses would not be military approved. He would have had to have military issued bifocals or glasses. In some of the other shots, you see the Marines and other soldiers holding their rifles. The soldiers in Vietnam used M16 rifles, and there are some spots where Joker has a pistol grip on his rifle, which wasn't used in the Vietnam War, and you also have M16A2s, which was introduced after in the 80s. In this picture down below, this Marine is wearing black leather boots, and these weren't used in Vietnam. By 1965, the US military started using jungle boots, and especially for this sort of fight in the jungles of Vietnam. So one of the big events that happened in this movie is the depiction of the Tet Offensive or the Tet ceasefire. This was a huge Viet Cong ambush onto American installations in Vietnam. And in one of the scenes, Joker is talking to one of his superiors at the Stars and Stripes magazine that he works for, essentially, and he kind of almost predicts it. He says he heard that it might not be upheld, which, I mean, in reality, that entire ambush completely caught everyone off guard. And up here throughout this movie, you see a lot of shots of Marines and other soldiers being interviewed. This might have happened quite often in Vietnam, but again, they probably were just told what to say, and they heavily filtered what they really aired on TV and what was really happening. You didn't hear people slandering the president on these kinds of interviews. So a lot of my critical engagement in these photos and some of these facts that really separated fact from fiction in the film, I got from historical textbooks, some internet web browsing, and some museum online databases.
Joker, why did you join my beloved corps? Sir, to kill, sir! So you're a killer? Sir, yes, sir! Let me see your war face. Sir, you got a war face? Ah! That's a war face! Now let me see your war face! Ah! Bullshit! You didn't convince me! Let me see your real war face! Ah!
Okay, so some things that I've learned in this project. One, I've found out that Stanley Kubrick is probably one of my favorite directors. I mean, this was a really enjoyable film to break down and to watch, and I kind of forgot about all of the other films that I had seen before that were also Kubrick films. I did a really big deep dive and kind of went into a rabbit hole about the Vietnam War, what it was like, things that were used, military tactics and techniques, what the government was like at the time, all kinds of everything, especially the propaganda. I really enjoyed learning more about it. I had a great-grandfather who was in the Vietnam War, and I have some of his army stuff from way back when, and it was kind of interesting to see both that in my room and also on my TV. Some of the bigger life lessons that I've learned from this project is really the purpose and the dialogue that surrounds war. It's always uncomfortable. It's always controversial. We're not just talking about the Vietnam War. I mean, it was incredibly controversial, but a lot of what happens in humanity, society, the world, global interaction, it's always uncomfortable, and it is very upsetting. It's not something you really want to talk about unless you really feel like you're on the right side of the fight. And more often than not, both sides are not very justified. It's really just a matter of opinion. That's what the Jungian psychology teaches us, that both our unconscious and our conscious minds, to simultaneously grow, we need to justify our actions by whatever means necessary. And unfortunately, that's what war is. We justify the cruel and inhumane actions that we partake onto other countries and other civilizations just for the sake of us feeling better about ourselves. And Joker is not the only person who wears both the peace sign and the Born to Kill helmet. Human beings and humanity itself has that nature of duality, that yin and yang, that pull and push force that either comes from that evil or good. That's why it's really important for us to understand the historical significance on the To reinforce the notion that history repeats itself. So if we don't learn from our mistakes in the past, it won't ever get better, or it won't ever change. And that's what Stanley Kubrick is talking about. It's uncomfortable to have these conversations, even though we all experience it. Go watch the movie and see for yourself. I highly recommend you watch it.